Here is one way to explain what the Indianapolis 500 is. Nowhere else on earth are there individual seats to accommodate 250,000 people at an event of any kind. Add to that the milling throng in the infield, and the total approaches 400,000. There's nothing like it anywhere.
The tradition and spectacle of the Indianapolis 500 dates back to 1911 and has occurred almost every year since. Throughout the month of May, qualifiers and other races build up to the 500 at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but none have the same international reach as the 500 itself. This race is so important that numerous restrictions and regulations have been put on cars since its creation to preserve the integrity of the race. Extensive qualifying and funding is required to even earn a spot on the track. Winning or even racing in this prestigious event comes with media attention and prize money. There have been thousands of competitors throughout the race's history, but prior to 1977, a large demographic was noticeably absent from the field: female racers. Women were not provided the same opportunities nor the same resources as their male counterparts, and for decades, none were fast enough to race in the Indy 500. A massive change came in 1977 with Janet Guthrie, a female race car driver. She was able to qualify for the Indy 500 and went on to become the first woman to finish it. Throughout her racing career, Guthrie faced many hardships, such as prejudice from the media and lack of sponsorship, as she strived to be the first woman to race in the Indy 500, leading the frontier and increasing women's participation in motorsports, further normalizing women in the field. Guthrie was born on March 7, 1938 in Iowa, and her family moved to Florida when she was 3 years old. Growing up, she was always interested in the science of how things moved. She started flying planes at the age of 13, building parachutes at 16, and earned her pilot's license at 17. In 1960, she graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in physics and began working as a development engineer for the Republic Aviation Company. Republic made many important developments as a precursor to Apollo 11, and she was even one of 4 women to qualify for the NASA Science Astronaut Program. She was disqualified before she was able to participate when a PhD was made a requirement. During her career at Republic, she purchased her first car, a gray Jaguar, that opened up a new interest in her. She fell in love with cars and began participating in informal road races and hill climbs in 1961. In 1964, Guthrie built a custom engine for her Jaguar and completed all the bodywork herself. The custom engine lasted her for 12 races, including a 500-mile circuit. Moving into the early 70s, she began building a name for herself with many strong placements, including 2 first-in-class finishes in the 12 Hours of Sebring. As media attention grew, Guthrie decided to participate in auto racing full-time in 1972, breaking into the higher ranks of a male-dominated sport. In early 1976, Indy team owner Rolla Volstead searched for a female driver to draw attention to his team, which led him to Janet Guthrie. She had never driven an Indy car before, but determined to make it big, she posted speeds as fast as her future teammate Dick Simmons and subsequently signed on to the Volstead team. In the same year, Arlene Hiss, another female race car driver, set her sights on the Indy 500. She made her debut in IndyCar racing, but the race went disastrously, as her speeds were too low and other drivers accused her of having poor race etiquette, despite them displaying similar behaviors. Hiss fell behind and was black flagged out of the race. Many male drivers became increasingly critical of women in racing, putting intense pressure on Guthrie to lead the frontier alone.
To try to set it straight is, I have no feelings whatsoever about Jenna one way or the other. I don't think any woman is going to make a good race driver.
Overcoming skepticism, on May 2, 1976, Guthrie competed in her first IndyCar race at Trenton International Speedway, a place where only 5 years prior, women had not even been allowed in the pit. She raced against some of the best IndyCar racers, running extremely well until the 79th lap when her gearbox failed and she was prevented from finishing the race. Nevertheless, she earned the support of many male drivers. Unfortunately, much of the media and racing fans still remained firmly against her participation in the sport.
Gianna, some of the other drivers said that one of their worries was that you weren't physically up to manhandling a 3,700-pound car?
Well, that's really just nonsense. You don't have to carry it, you just sit in it.
The odds were still stacked against Guthrie. After failing to qualify for the Indy 500 in 1976, Guthrie was back at it again in 1977. Her first major race of the year was the Daytona 500, where, despite steering troubles, she managed to scrape through qualifiers, coming into the race itself seated 39th out of 40. Guthrie managed to pull off a 12th place finish, which got her the honor of top rookie of the Daytona 500. The media coverage was shifting to be more positive, with the Richmond Times-Dispatch commenting, "Janet Guthrie insists she is not Wonder Woman. She is wrong." Guthrie proved the Times-Dispatch right with her qualifications for the Indy 500.
Janet Guthrie pushed her car to 188.403.
She posted the fastest time of the day on the second weekend of qualifications as newspapers around the country pasted her face on the front cover. Her times further opened up the discussion of women in racing, allowing more acceptance to take root. In May 1977, Guthrie became the first woman to compete in the illustrious Indianapolis 500. Unfortunately, mechanical troubles took her out of the race after only 10 laps, but through her remarkable achievements, she continued to push the frontier of women in racing. Her accomplishments continued to stack up when she raced the Indy 500 again in 1978. She managed to put her own team together, sponsored by Texaco, one of the biggest funders of automobile racing, and qualified for the second time. She finished 9th, a historic achievement, despite driving with a wrist fracture and last-minute car adjustments.
She drove with a broken wrist. The lady can literally drive with one hand tied behind her back and compete with the men.
Media exploded after Guthrie's 2 Indy 500 races, with headlines such as "Janet Guthrie talks of being a pioneer" and "Janet Guthrie, now one of the boys, taking over the news." Much of the media shifted to become more positive regarding her accomplishments, and many of her competitors, such as 1979 Indy 500 champion AJ Foyt, spoke highly of her in news coverage. Regardless, she was still forced out of racing shortly after her showing in the 1979 Indy 500 due to an overwhelming lack of funding. Although she had proved to be a competent racer, the majority of corporations were still not willing to take the risk of investing in a female driver. She stated once in an interview following her retirement from the sport, "I miss racing terribly. I won't ever quit missing it." Women's racing still had a long way to go in terms of equality, but Guthrie helped push the frontier further than it had ever been before. With the news coverage, women and girls across the country were able to see her accomplishments live and listen to her speak about overcoming the obstacles that had stood in her path. Guthrie paved the way for many of the well-known women in racing today. Her achievements have been recognized through her induction into the International Women's Sports Hall of Fame, the International Motorsports Hall of Fame, and the Automotive Hall of Fame. Drivers like Sarah Fisher, Danica Patrick, Pippa Mann, and many more have continued to push the frontier that Guthrie started. Over 40 years later, her Indy 500 still hold a prevalent impact on racing as more people have continued to accept women into the racing industry.
My peers were probably the most supportive of me being behind the wheel of an Indy car.
9 women have attempted the 500 since her debut, but the struggle for sponsorship and positive media attention has continued. Janet Guthrie's Indy 500 races led the frontier of women in racing to the national stage. Even though Guthrie forever changed the history of women in racing, she has never wanted to be remembered just as the first woman to race the Indy 500, but as a damn good racing driver.